Hello. I'd like very much to thank the Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy for this award. Their partnership with the Police Foundation is obviously very important in our professional lives, very important in terms of the debate that's going on right now in this country about the future of policing. My first job was in a political science department, and I'm in a political science department to this day. I started off teaching urban politics. That was at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, at the end of the 1960s. It was noticeable even then that policing was a really big political item. It was a big item in cities' budgets, always the second after the school system. They were always in the headlines, and police were always a big source of political problems for mayors. It used to drive them crazy. The end of the 1960s was also a time of great ferment. It was a time of cultural ferment. You'd go to a restaurant and there'd be a big sign in the door that said, "No hippies allowed." It was a time of nasty law and order politics. About the time I went to Macalester College at the end of the 1960s, across the country, police chiefs were running for mayor and being elected on really tough law and order platforms. In Philadelphia, Frank Rizzo, for example, the chief of police in Philadelphia, was elected mayor of Philadelphia. And in the town I was living in, Minneapolis, Charles Stenvig, who was the police chief, defeated the political establishment and was elected mayor of Minneapolis. So there I was, new to this. I read a little bit, because a little bit all there was to read about policing in those days. And then I ankled down to my local police station to say hello. Well, that was the end of that, because of course I couldn't get past the front desk. College professors were in the same category with hippies and yippies and other generally unwashed people, and also with weathermen and bomb throwers of all stripes, all of whom were very busy at the end of the 1960s. So I retreated to aggregate data and surveys for a while, and started to build a kind of research program around crime and policing and politics. Later I changed jobs and went to Northwestern, and on the strength of my interest in surveys, I ended up with a 2-year visiting fellowship at the National Institute of Justice. That's where I worked on the victimization surveys and the city surveys, and that's where I discovered ASC, in a place that was much more interesting than political science, and with much more interesting kinds of policy questions. My work has generally been motivated by two concerns. First of all, it's always community-oriented, and that reflects really the influence of the Institute for Policy Research and all of its previous incarnations where I've had appointments. So when you think about my work on victimization and fear of crime, neighborhood disorder and the impact of disorder on community life, community-based crime prevention, did a lot of work in the 1970s and 80s with Dennis Rosenbaum on the attempts by community groups working on their own to try to tackle crime and fear problems in the neighborhoods. Community policing, and then procedural justice policing, which is my latest concern. All these have a very strong community orientation. Sometimes I was a cops and robbers person. Usually I was a communities person, but I was never a robbers person. I'm not a criminologist. I'm in a political science department, so don't forget that. The second feature of my work is that it's always been program oriented. In my book, Disorder and Decline, there was a whole section called Dealing with Disorder, where I talked about policing programs and the attempts of community organizations to capture control of neighborhood life. In terms of crime victims, I worked with Rob Davis at Vera and others on evaluating victim service programs. My work I've always asked the question, does it work? But I start with the it. It for me is 2 capital letters. What exactly was the program is actually my first question. In reality, on the ground, not from the press release. What really did they do when they were out there? What was the politics involved in the origins of the program? Policies are just politics by another means, and so what was the political basis for spending all this money? All interesting programs are political programs. I didn't focus on the press release there either. It's always been my own political analysis that I featured in terms of describing the programs that I've been evaluating or concerned with. And remember, I have a political science union card, so I get to do that. And then finally, how much did it cost, and how did they raise the money to do it? If it's an interesting program, it's not going to be cheap. and understanding where the money came from is a very important part of understanding the program. To end up at the present, I was at a meeting with Egon Bittner, whose work all of you know. I'm old enough to actually have known Egon. And about 2000, I asked him at a small meeting what he thought had been the biggest changes that he'd seen in policing in his lifetime. And he had one answer, which was, interestingly, he said, I can get in the front door. That is, in Egon's lifetime and in my lifetime, our ability to get in the front door has been a huge shift in policing. And I've been around long enough that would be one of my answers to that question as well. Whereas in Minneapolis at the end of the 1960s, I couldn't get past the front desk. 15 years later, I went out at night with a raid and a narcotics operation in the Desire Housing Project in New Orleans with the undercover narcotics squad that I was evaluating. That was exciting, and you got to do that sort of thing. Recently, I interviewed 700 Chicago police officers in 22 police districts all over the city. And no one at City Hall ever thought to ask me, well, what's in your questionnaire, Wes? They actually never looked at the questionnaire. It was only afterwards when I met with the chief to tell him what I found that he said, it shows what it shows. So the accessibility of policing to research and evaluation has been, of course, an enormous change that us older guys all would recognize right away. Another change, police chiefs are still running for mayor. It's still happening as well. Around the 2000s, for example, Tom Potter, elected mayor of Portland. Clarence Harmon ran for mayor but lost in St. Louis. Jerry Sanders, elected mayor a couple of terms in San Diego. Lee Brown, 2 terms in Houston. So police chiefs are still at it. But what's interesting is they all ran as reformers. They all ran as characterizing themselves as friends of the people. They brought community policing to their cities. They brought police reform to their cities. And that change in the politics of policing, at least at the top, to me would be the second thing that I've observed in my career. I can get in the front door and police want us in the front door. And that's a huge change as well. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great time at this conference. I'm sure I've seen the program. I'm sure it's going to be very stimulating. And have a good rest of the summer.